Hi, everyone. Welcome to this evening's virtual event with Robbie Arnott. My name is Carell Centers, and I'm the events director here at Bookshop Santa Cruz, where I'm broadcasting live from my desk. And here at Bookshop, we know there's a lot going on in the world right now. As an independent bookstore, our community is vital to us, locally, nationally, and even globally. And we are so grateful to you for spending your resources and your evening with us in the midst of a global pandemic, rapid climate deterioration, the essential work of dismantling the lie of white supremacy, and ongoing economic and political upheaval. We see these talks as a way to deepen and refresh in order to return to the vital work that is before us, and we hope you find both refuge and inspiration here. So tonight we are so thrilled to welcome one of Australia's most acclaimed young novelists, Robbie Arnott. Robbie's going to share the Rain Heron with us, and then he'll take some audience questions. But before we get started, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the platform we're using tonight, which is Crowdcast. And I did want to mention to folks in the audience that when Robbie and I were in the green room, we were experiencing a little bit of camera trouble, which is Crowdcast is a little bit notorious for not being the most technically sound. So bear with us if we do lose Robbie's image in the event. We will work to fix that right away, but it might be a little bit of a lag. So just bear with us if that does happen. This event is being recorded, and so if you do miss any moments or you want to come back to it, you can find the recorded event right back on this same page shortly after the event concludes. And you can see to the right side of your screen, there's a chat window there. You can share your engagements there, any engagement with the work or thoughts that you are having about Robbie's talk or presentation. If you're having tech issues, you can pop that in there and I will get to you just as soon as I can. If you find that distracting, you can hide it by clicking on the little arrow at the top right to hide it. For our questions tonight, you can pop those into the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. Also at the bottom of the screen, there is a donate button there, which you can click to donate to our events program to keep our program moving along. And right at the bottom of the screen, there is a button that says Buy the Book, perhaps one of our most critical elements of the event, because your purchase of the featured book tonight is what powers our events. It shows the publisher that our audience is invested and engaged here in Santa Cruz. You support the author for their work and time, and you position your local indie bookstore to support face-to-face programming like tonight's event. So thank you so much for your purchase. Author events are all virtual for the foreseeable future, but we have some great stuff coming up, including poet Kim Adonisio for her new collection. She'll be here on March 30th. It's a free event. We also have Morgan Jerkins for her first novel, her third book, first novel, coming on April 7th. That's a ticketed event. And we just launched our 2021 Spring Reading Challenge, which includes the Rain Heron. So you don't want to miss out on participating in that if you are reading the book tonight. Definitely get some credit for that as well. And I will pop a link into the chat about that. Beyond that, we just thank you so much for coming to our events, and I'm so delighted to introduce Robbie Arnott. Robbie is the author of the novel Flames, which won the Margaret Scott Prize, was shortlisted for the Victorian Premier's Literary Prize for Fiction, the Guardian's Not the Booker Prize, and the Readings Prize for New Australian Fiction. And it was longlisted for the Miles Franklin Literary Award. In 2019, Robbie was named a Sydney Morning Herald Best Young Australian Novelist. And we are so grateful to have him here with us tonight, all the way from Tasmania, where he's joining us from tomorrow afternoon. So thank you so much for being here, Robbie, and welcome to Bookshop Santa Cruz.
Thank you so much, Carell, and thank you everybody for tuning in and coming along. This is really quite overwhelming for me. I'm on the other side of the world. I'd first like to start by acknowledging the Muwinina people whose unceded land I'm currently living on and coming to you from. I'd like to acknowledge their people and their elders past, present and emerging. Yeah, so I'm from Tasmania and that's where I am now. I don't know how much people in Santa Cruz know about Tasmania, but essentially it's an island state of Australia, just at the bottom of the world, often referred to as North Antarctica, because while the rest of Australia is hot and everyone's tanned and there's deserts and beaches and crocodiles, down here it's probably a little bit more like Scotland, and we've got mountains and it's really cold most of the time. The one thing Tasmania does have is really, really amazing wilderness. It's not a hot place, but we do have amazing rainforests and mountain ranges and our own version of beaches. Very beautiful, but somewhat chilly. And I encourage, if anyone's interested in reading, if they've read the Rain Heron and kind of want to know about the visual inspiration of the book, you can probably look up Tasmanian wilderness or Tasmanian outdoors on Google, and you'll see some pretty interesting pictures. And this is where I've grown up. I lived on the mainland Australia for a little while for work, but I've moved back here, and I find the place where I live really, really inspiring. It's a very, very kind of nature immersed sort of place. And I think that filters through a lot into my writing. And everywhere all over the island, you're never very far away from a wilderness World Heritage sort of waterfall or rainforest or somewhere that just feels like an ancient world. And that's one of the things I wanted to do when I was writing about the Rain Heron, when I was creating the book. I wanted to come up with this kind of origin nature fable or a myth that felt like it had been around forever, but also was completely new and original. I didn't know if I'd be able to do this, but I was really interested in the idea of it, in creating a story that felt both completely unrelated to our current world, but also like it could live alongside it. So I started creating this idea of a rain heron, it's basically a storm turned into an animal. I wanted something that had the savagery and the beauty of nature. The way we can look at a storm and be entranced by how beautiful and captivating it is, but also know it can do us great harm, and we should probably stay away if we know what's good for us. And that's what I was thinking of. I wanted to create a book that felt like that and create a fable and an animal that felt like that. I didn't have any grand plot lined out, but that was where I began. And I thought to start today, I might read from the very start of the book in what opens as almost a myth. So this is from the very, very beginning. A farmer lived, but not well. If she planted grain, it would not sprout. If she grew rice, it would rot. If she tried to raise livestock, they would gasp and choke and die before they'd seen a second dawn. Success and happiness were foreign to her, and she'd forgotten what it was like to go to bed unhungry. All she had was her hunger and her farm, as far as she could tell, wanted her to starve. Her struggles weren't due to laziness or a lack of skill. She'd been raised on farms. Her parents and grandparents had been farmers, and she knew as much about crops and soil and animal husbandry as anyone else in the valley where she lived. She worked hard and long, under a harsh sun and in bone-soaking rain. When she'd exhausted every technique she'd learned from her family, she turned to books, experiments, strange fertilizers, none of which helped. No enemy had salted her fields or cursed her name, for she had no enemies. She was liked and respected by all the people of the valley. There was no reason for her farm's failure. Yet her crops continued to rot, and her livestock continued to die. 6 years after her parents died and left her on the farm alone, 6 years of hungry, dismal failure, a black storm blew over the mountains and into the valley. Thunder crashed through walls. Lightning licked trees. The wind grew fangs and chewed barns into splinters. Worst of all was the rain. Oceans of freezing, sideways blown water heaved onto the farms of the valley, turning paddocks into lakes and ponds into seas. These wide waters soon swelled the river that ran through the valley, hastening its current, carrying away topsoil, crops, herds, fences and outbuildings. People took shelter in their stone houses and animals died outside in the chocolate flood. Behind their old thick walls, they were safe. Everyone was accounted for. Everyone but the unlucky farmer. After the storm stopped raging, it took a full day before the floodwaters began to drop. Only then could the people of the valley venture out, in fishing boats and on upturned dining tables, to try to salvage their property. It was at the dusk of this day, a day of sorrowful searching, of fishing with colanders and paddling with hat stands, that they found her. As the weak sun dipped, a group of teenagers, piloting an ancient coracle, saw something strange in the limbs of an old, leafless oak. Paddling nearer, they saw that it was the unlucky farmer, dead or unconscious, her body draped over the branches like a nightgown hung out to dry. But more curious than this was what they saw next. A huge heron, the colour of rain, suddenly emerging from the flood in a fast, steep flight. leaving not even a ripple on the water beneath it. With a languid flap of its wings, it came to rest in the crown of the oak, standing over the unlucky farmer as if on guard. The teenagers brought their boat to a stop. This water-risen heron was unlike any other they'd seen before. Any other heron, any other living creature. Its blue-grey feathers were so pale, they claimed later, that they could see straight through the bird. Its body was pierced by strands of dusky light, and the tree was clearly visible behind its sharp, moist beak. A ghost, one claimed. A mirage, said another. But before they could get closer, the heron hunched its neck, flapped its wings, and leapt into the sky. A thick spray of water fell from its wings, far more water than could have been resting on its feathers. Then it disappeared into the remnants of the storm. The teenagers watched it vanish, not sure what they were seeing, not trusting their tired eyes and waterlogged minds. At that moment, the unlucky farmer rolled in her cradle of branches, coughed out a spurt of black mud, and sucked at the air with great need, great violence. So that's how the book begins, and it does open with this fable that we're not exactly sure if it's real or not, because it kind of has that tone to it. But that's not how the whole book works. Beyond that, it takes a slightly more conventional kind of novel structure afterwards, and where we realize that this opening the book almost serves as a origin myth for the country in which the novel is set. And the novel is set in a country that's unnamed and recently gone through a military coup. None of the details of this military coup really come clear too much in the book. Suffice to say that it's happened and people are now living in a fractured, kind of scared society in many ways. And that's perhaps represented by the main character at the start of the book. She's a woman named Ren, and she's fled to a mountain to live as a hermit. She's experienced some pretty horrible things during the coup, and she just wants to live alone in peaceful existence with the wilderness in a beautiful place where she used to go as a child. Her only way of surviving is by hunting and trapping and trading with a man she knows from a village at the base of the mountain. And that's how she ekes out her very meager existence. But this is all thrown into turmoil when a squad of soldiers arrive on the mountain. They've been sent there by the military to find the Rain Heron. Now, what's not clear is whether or not the Rain Heron actually exists or whether or not it's a fable. But the stories of the country say that it comes from that region, and if it were to be anywhere, it would be living at the top of that mountain. And these soldiers, led by a rather ruthless young woman called Lieutenant Harker, believe that this hermit living on the side of the mountain is the only person or the most likely person who'd be able to help them find it. And they go about coercing and convincing her to help them. And that is really where the kind of tension and story kicks off. And to say too much more about the plot really starts delving into spoiler territory, and I don't want to think too many things away in case anyone's thinking about reading it. But that is essentially what happens. And we follow these characters in different directions, in different periods through time, as they struggle to come to terms with what they've done and who they are and whether they can justify their actions. All these people have come from quite traumatic backgrounds and experienced quite terrible things. And one of the main themes of the book is violence, and whether or not the violence that they enact can be justified by the violence that's been enacted upon them, as well as the way that violence we inflict on each other bleeds over to the violence we inflict on the natural world. Essentially, there's no end to a cycle of violence once it's begun unless someone chooses to end it. And it's very much a book interested in nature and interested in climate and what we're doing to the planet. Yes, it's set in an unnamed country and in a place that's not specifically real to anywhere in our world, but many of the things that are happening to the environment mirror what we're going through right now. There's kind of unpredictable seasons and unpredictable things happening and heightened weather of all kinds. And a lot of this was really influenced partly by what's been happening for a long time. But as I was writing it, I don't know how many people remember the mega fires of late 2019, early 2020 that tore through Australia. And it was completely, I imagine a lot of people are aware of it, but down here it was completely unavoidable. It felt like our whole country was on fire. And a couple of billion animals died, and there were people fleeing towns on boats as giant fires roared through once wet rainforests, and there's all these imagery and videos of people dive into the ocean just to survive. And it was a very real, tangible experience of the effects of global heating coming right to our doorstep. The same thing actually happened in Tasmania, the island where I'm from, the year before. It didn't get as much coverage because it wasn't as big or as destructive, but we have some really old forests filled with tree species that live for tens of thousands of years. And unlike most eucalypts, which I guess most people associate with Australia, they haven't evolved to burn. And if they burn, they die and don't come back. So we had forests that normally are in snow-capped plateaus on fire, and they will never come back. And they're some of the rarest and most beautiful trees on the planet. So a lot of that was happening as well at the same time. And I was trying to write this book about a nature fable set in a different world where there are these military soldiers contending with a hermit trying to capture a mythical creature. And my idea of writing something quite almost escapist or different really started to become impossible. And the terror that was happening to the natural world around me started leaking over into the book. And if you get through the book, I think that becomes quite clear. I was hoping to create this immersive world that was different but kind of similar to our own, but it ended up having a bit of destruction of the environment in it too, partly through human means. And that's really, really where it went. And there's another author from Tasmania named Richard Flanagan who won the Booker Prize a few years ago. And he said recently that the best novels are the ones that escape their author's intentions. And I hope that's true of this book. It didn't end up being exactly what I planned it being, but I hope it became something strange and worthwhile anyway. These things get out of your hands and you just have to go along with it. One of the characters I mentioned earlier was named Lieutenant Harker. She becomes a bigger and bigger presence throughout the novel. She does some pretty astounding things. I was really interested in following her story, both from her childhood up to where she is now. And part of the book deals with her childhood set on a completely different part of the country, away from this forest and away from the Rain Heron. And what she and her family do and the members of her community is exist by harvesting ink from very large squid. And the way they do this is through a rather unconventional method whereby they exchange their blood for the ink with the squid. What they do is they open a vein over the water and the squid rise to the surface and drink all this blood. And once they're full, they go really kind of groggy and sluggish. And this allows the people to then milk the ink from these creatures in a kind of really simple and gentle way. It's a bit of a weird idea, but I wanted to explore it in the book because I thought it fit within the universe of the Rain Heron, having these large, fantastical creatures who interact with people in different but almost believable ways. And the ink is something that I wanted to feel like almost a magical creature itself. So I'm just going to read a short section from the book whereby this section explains what that squid ink that people go to so much effort to, what it can do and what its properties are. The ink was sold to people from the north, then churned, vaporized, and used to make perfectly antiperspirant deodorant that rendered pores sweatless and odorless for up to 3 days. It was added to sauces and stews to create a rich, meaty, fishy flavour, or mixed with vegetable gum and powdered horse hooves into a paste that was sold as industrial-grade engineering glue. It was greased onto engines to provide unusually long-lasting lubrication, and it was brewed into a black wine that hit the tongue like a sweet ocean breeze. But it was most commonly used as dye. When mixed with other colours of dye, or paint, or chalk, or lesser inks, it vastly enhanced the qualities of that colour, in the same way that salt brings out depth of flavour in food. Adding it to a matte red would bring out a bright pop of open vein crimson, while mixing it with a basic purple would create violent blinks of violet. It lent a soft, mossy texture to an average dark green, and a navy depth to dark blue that was so strong it brought about the smell of the sea. White shone brighter, orange shimmered like a sunset. Pale blue became so sky-like it made one forget about the existence of clouds. So that's the ink that these people harvest from squid through a version of almost symbiotic relationship with nature. And that is something that I kind of wanted to explore in this book, because I'm not sure what it's like in Santa Cruz, but where I'm from, we have a government that is very, very filled with climate deniers at the moment, and filled with people, and our society ends up being filled with people who kind of scoff and roll their eyes if you mention anything about perhaps living more harmoniously with nature. It's seen as a kind of naive thing to think. But I'm not sure I necessarily agree, because while we have progressed very far technologically as a society, for thousands and thousands of years, people all around the world existed in a very harmonious way with nature, in that they were taking a lot from the world and giving a lot back to it, and managing to keep living for generations and generations without absolutely destroying the place where they lived. And I find that quite inspiring. I like to try and take a really long view of human history, as opposed to even Australia's only existed as a British colony and then country for about 220 years. So it's not even the blink of an eye, really. And that's a country where I live. So I like to try and think about human history a bit longer and a bit broader. And when you think about people that way, it makes perfect sense that people might try and not kill all these giant squid, and they might actually just try and keep the population alive. And I try to pair that with imaginative things in a way that feels pleasing and interesting, and not a lesson or a lecture. I try and create an interesting story with kind of an immersive atmospheric place that reflects these things that I find interesting, and themes that I think are worth thinking about. And that's all I try and do when I'm writing novels, is not come up with anything didactic or slam lessons down at people or anything like that. What I really want to do is pursue the things I find really interesting, and the things that devour me from the inside out, that I find myself lying awake at night thinking about, that I can't solve or figure out just through thinking about them rationally. So I try and twist them into imaginative stories and let my imagination run wild, which is probably pretty clear if anyone reads the book. And if anyone finishes, what I don't really mind what anyone takes away from this book, because I view novels as two-way conversations. I think they're much more interesting when a reader can bring as much to the book as a writer may put into it. And that way that can extend and broaden how we all feel about literature, because as soon as a book is finished, it no longer belongs to the author. But if people were to take anything away from it, I hope there'd be a sense of hope that no matter what we do or what we've done, there is still time for us to do things differently, whether that's with our relationship with the natural world, our relationship with other people. I think it's never too late to change. It's never too late to improve things. And if that were to be an overall view of the book, then I would be really happy. But of course, people might take all sorts of things out of it, like, why is there this giant bird made out of water ripping people's eyes out? Why are there these giant squids that have magical ink? Along with many other things. But that's what I would hope. I would hope that it has a sense of hope, as well as quite a strong sense of magic. And that was all I was really going to talk about today, guys. There are quite a few other things I'm happy to talk about, but it might be good if anyone wants to ask a question. I often get asked about why I write about female characters, which is something I'm really, really happy to talk about. I often get asked about where my weird ideas come from, which I can try and answer. I got abused by a men's rights activist the other day. So anything and anything, I'm happy to talk about anything.
Thank you so much for that talk and for reading from the book. It's it's definitely an amazing book, and I highly recommend it. I found myself just really getting lost in it, which I kind of was talking to you about before we got started with the event. And I know I have a coworker that's on the event right now that anyway, I definitely, anyone that's on the fence, I definitely recommend picking it up. So yeah, I'd love to hear some about about the female characters, because both the protagonist, the hermit, and the lieutenant are female characters. And yeah, I'd love to hear more about that, as well as the men's rights activists. You guys have those there too? Uh-oh.
Oh yeah, we've got all sorts here. No, I think it's a really good thing to talk about. So I'm a man. And when I was writing this book and creating these characters, I wasn't thinking very hard about gender. That might be a symptom of the privilege I have, but I didn't really think about it too hard. I was just trying to create these characters who fit this kind of mythic story structure. And it ended up becoming clear to me that both Ren and Zoe Harker were women. And then I had to kind of interrogate that and figure out, why have I done that? Have I done that for reasons that served the plot, or I'd done that for kind of lazy stereotyping reasons or anything. And what I came away with, particularly with Ren, was that she displays this really kind of stoic resilience in the way she lives in the wilderness and the way she goes about her life. And she lives out there as a hermit, and she does all these really tough things, but they're not tied to her sense of personality or tied to a sense of heroism or overcoming the wilderness, which are things which I think are really masculine, both in society and in a lot of storytelling and literature traditions. And I wasn't interested in doing that. Thinking of that character as male made me think of, a great white hunter out there carving their place in the wilderness. And I just got so bored thinking about that, and I just wasn't interested. And this resilience she showed felt quite like a feminine strength to me. I come from a very matriarchal family. My mother and aunts and grandmother and sister are all very important in my life, and they've actually been really inspiring and kind of influential. And I guess they were the people I was thinking about when I was creating this character. So once that had done, and I realized I couldn't have her as a man, I just had to do the best job I could, and just had to work really hard and do my best to represent a female experience the best way I could. The same goes with Lieutenant Harker. The way she did not tie her achievements and her actions and the way she went about things to any sense of personal glory or personal pride or anything. It was almost her sense of survival. Felt again like a woman to me. She felt like she was a survivor and not at all an egoist. And for whatever reason, when I conceived of her again as a male character, I found her to be a bit more generic and uninteresting. And the actions I created for this character to do didn't fit with a male character that I could think about. And again, that's all I had to do was then do my best to try and write them clearly and evocatively and originally in a way that also felt true. I think that can be done. I think people can write about other genders in a way that's effective. I don't think they always get it right, obviously. I just had to do my best possible job, and that's the honest truth. I'm more than aware that I might have not got it wrong, and I might not got it always right, and I tried not to delve too deeply into any internal experiences with the characters, because that's something I couldn't effectively do. That's why the book is, with these characters, does feel almost a bit at arm's length sometimes, because it's talking more about what they're doing than what they're thinking. And that's how I went about it. They just felt like.
Did you have your mom and sisters, the women in your life, take a pass? Did you have them read drafts and give you feedback in terms of like, is this feel real to you, or how was that process for you? Yeah,
they definitely read it. I was careful not to just throw it at them and being like, I'm writing about women, make sure I get it right.
Please.
No, I didn't do it like that. I just said I didn't ask them any questions about female characters, but they read it, and then I asked what they thought. So rather than kind of make them, check it for me or anything, I just asked them what they thought about it, because I knew they'd tell me if I was, as we say down here, talking out my ass. So I do that quite a lot. And with other writers I know who we read each other's work and help each other out. And I kind of tested it that way. And at the end, I just had to grit my teeth and go for it. That's essentially how I did it.
Cool. And you're running, did someone come after you? You'd mentioned something about a men's.
Yeah, this guy got up at a writers' festival in Australia. We still have some writers' festivals in parts of Australia where there's limited corona. I got accused of how all my male characters are weaklings and all my female characters are unbelievably strong and flawless, and I was like, they're not flawless, they do awful things. But I think something like gender traitor or something I got called, and it was funny more than anything. Like, this guy's crazy. But I think if you're pissing off male rights activists, you're probably doing the right thing. I don't know.
Yeah, keep doing what you're doing if that's the
weird
for sure.
I think some woman hit him. Right. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's a hard thing to respond to too. In that case, you're like up on the stage, kind of like. I mean, I don't know. How did you kind of deal with him?
Oh, it wasn't too bad. I just kind of told him that I thought his energies could possibly be better directed in another place. And then some women started screaming at him. So, yeah, great. But I don't mind that stuff. That's fine. I think if you do this, you got to have a pretty thick skin. But yeah, I felt more bad for him than anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we have a question from Laura here talking about, I think this is not a spoiler. I think we're safe with this question. Laura asks, it was difficult to reconcile Zoe Harker's reverence towards the squid with her mission to capture the Rain Heron. She was certainly a different woman than she was a child, and I enjoyed following her story. Can you expand on your conception of that character?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a really good question, and it was really tricky to do within the book. What I was trying to explore in that character and in this sequence of events there is that when Zoe's a child, she has this really nice relationship with nature, particularly through her aunt, what her aunt shows her, and the way they continue this tradition that is very tied into the natural world. And then through her experiences in that section where another character comes in and starts despoiling their relationship with nature and other things start going wrong, she's witness to a series of violent acts that take things away from her and harm nature and harm her family, and she's unavoidably caught up within them. And I wanted to explore how then she has to make some very difficult choices later in life to get to where she is up on the mountain. And what I wanted to happen is show how these moments of our childhood or moments when we're younger that feel very true to us then, like feel like we'll always be like that, can be really taken away from us through acts of violence and through acts of trauma. And especially in ways that aren't necessarily conscious. So Zoe never actively says, you know what, fuck nature, I don't like it anymore, I'm going to go capture the Rain Heron. It's much more subtle than that. Through a series of traumas and a series of violent events, she learns how to behave in a way that she wouldn't have wanted to, but she does learn how to do it through the actions around her. And by the time she's an adult, she's internalized these things and they become actual options for her. She thinks, I know how to do this, I can do this, I've seen how it's done. She doesn't actively consider it that way, but these are the lessons we internalize. And that's what I wanted to show us happen to her character. She's been through some such horrific things and she's trying to survive. And she, without ever realizing it, starts perpetrating the violent acts that were perpetrated upon her when she was younger. She becomes quite cold. And I hope that answers your question. That's what I was trying to achieve with her character, particularly in that first half of the book.
Thank you. Yeah, and you mentioned the violence there in your answer, which during your talk you mentioned about kind of the cycle of violence and how, the way to exit that cycle, or, the way to get rid of that cycle is to just kind of choose not to. I was wondering if you can kind of talk more about that, like in terms of, especially with climate change or, the destruction of the climate, I feel like there's elements of it that are so kind of unintentional, so short-sighted. Like there's like that experiment where if you give a kid an Oreo and it's like you can either have 2 Oreos later or like 1 now, like they want the Oreo now, like they can't wait. And that's kind of how I heard it recently on NPR described with how humans are not able to really handle the idea of the climate, because we can't deal with that kind of long-term thing. On the other hand, I feel like there's also this real violence towards it, or this like desire to destroy it, which is, it's just really, I don't know. How do you think that those two things play in? Like, I think in the Rain Heron, there's such a desire to kind of capture and, to have. And then on the other hand, there's like this unintentional thing. Like I like driving my big ass pickup truck, or, I need the AC running. And then you look out the window and there's these forest fires. So I guess, how do you see that kind of those two different dangers, I guess, those two different threats?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. And I think a really, not a clear, but something that really links those things, violence and climate destruction, is entitlement, and a sense of entitlement that people have over their own lives and over things around them, and that extends over into the natural world. I think that really is clear in a lot of particularly Western societies, and that if I work hard, I should be able to get what I want. If I do the things I've been told to do, I should be able to do this. And there's no empathy extended towards anything beyond your immediate family circle or friends. And so there's no empathy, which is, we have a huge problem here in Australia with people who think refugees who arrive here by boat should be locked up offshore, which I just find insane. Like, I know you guys have border problems. Well, not border problems too, but people who are locked up in cages at the border, like, that must feel insane to do that to another human being who's just fleeing a war-torn country. But because people aren't taught through our society to extend empathy, and they have an entitlement over the things around them beyond their own immediate circle, that can lead to violence, and it leads to entitlement over the natural world as well. There's these huge big schools of bluefin tuna in the sea. Why shouldn't we go catch them? No one can stop me. It's not hurting my family or friends. And people aren't very empathetic beyond that. And I think that's one of the major societal problems, is because it takes work to be empathetic beyond the people you know. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get political at all. But I think everyone knows a conservative person who is just the loveliest, nicest family person, who are kind and generous to their family and lovely to their friends. But when it comes to voting, or when it comes to anything important, they'd happily screw over other people because it's not their family or friends. And I think that extends into that's a form of violence. And I think that extends into, well, who cares if, I don't want to cut down the local park where I take the kids. I want the trees to stay there. But I'm happy for all the forest in Indonesia to burn down for palm oil because it's not my backyard. So I think those things really extend into each other. And to be honest, I think a lot of it's, I don't know what you guys are like with your levels of toxic masculinity. We've got it real good here.
Nice and high.
Yeah, we've got it real good here. And that breathes into a sense of entitlement too. I think it's really unhelpful. You mentioned driving your big truck around. Things like that are just showing off and trying to prove whatever function you think a man should serve in society that's completely outdated and probably was never a good idea in the first place. And I think these things are actually quite linked, this idea of trying to be a big, strong man and cutting down every second tree you see. I think, unfortunately, that can be a bit linked.
Thank you for attempting to answer my incredibly rambling question. That was very thoughtful.
Well, I hope I made sense. I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just so it's so comforting to know that there's someone that has like the gifts that you have in your craft that is thinking about these kinds of issues. Because I think it's kind of like what you said, where as a novelist, you're not trying to bang us readers over the head with some kind of answer or lecture us, which obviously is not effective. Like, we can look at so many examples of how people don't respond to that. But to have these topics that are so important right now, and to have it come out in a work of art where it's like you're with the person and you're experiencing this journey with them, I think I just find it very comforting and very it's a refuge in a way. So thank you so much for that. I'm really curious. Yeah, I'm really curious to know some of the writers and books that you have enjoyed. I mean, there's such an element of nature writing and exquisite kind of atmosphere and detail in your book, and obviously in your first book as well. So I'd love to know some of your kind of influences, I guess, or who you enjoy reading.
Yeah, I'm clearly quite a wide reader. I do enjoy a lot of nature writing. I really do. I like a lot of Robert Macfarlane and Helen Macdonald from the UK. H is for Hawk is a really wonderful book I enjoyed. I like Barry Lopez and Arctic Dreams. I think that's a pretty incredible book. And as for fiction, which I'm obviously a very big fiction reader, I really like Jennifer Egan. I think she's amazing. Particularly, I was really influenced by the style and structure of A Visit from the Goon Squad, which is probably like the most common book to say in America, but like no one in Tasmania read it. So whenever I say it, people are like, oh, wow, and they write it down. So yeah, and as for like really descriptive prose, particularly in fiction, I don't think you can go past Annie Proulx. Particularly her short stories. So her stories set in Wyoming and Montana and Virginia. She just has the crispest, most beautiful way of describing the world that kind of fills it with emotion, but is also such clarity of description as well. Whenever I read an Annie Proulx story, I just think I need to go to Wyoming. This place sounds amazing. And I just feel totally transported. So at the risk of not banging off too long, I think, she's incredible. And in an Australian sense, I really like Richard Flanagan, who I mentioned earlier. I think he's really wonderful. And luckily, I grew out of my phase of when I was 18 or 19, which I don't know if Americans go through this. Got obsessed with like Raymond Carver for a while. You read all the minimalism and think this is genius. And then I became a horrible David Foster Wallace fan for ages. Not that, I really like his work. I still really like his work. I think he's amazing. But I became one of those people who was insufferable, walking around with Infinite Jest. And I feel really lucky, and I think my family's really lucky that I grew out of that. And I got a bit more into descriptive prose of the natural world, I think. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to those. Some of those that you named are definitely some favorites here at the store, and some new ones too. So thank you for sharing. Great. Looks like we have another question coming in here. Laura, yeah. So what is, we'd love to hear about your process for the writing, descriptive and just your novel writing. Do you spend time writing outdoors, or I'd love to hear about your process.
Yeah, I mean, I don't write outdoors much because I get too distracted, but I go outdoors a lot. Like I said, I live 15 minutes from World Heritage Protected National Wilderness trails. So I'm up there quite a lot. And also I do a lot of snorkeling and getting in the water and things like that. And I guess when it comes to describing natural elements, I do something I think people call close watching, where I take a very intense stare and look at things I want to write about, whether that's out exactly where I am or maybe through photos as well, in order to try and create a sense of clarity of what I'm seeing that goes beyond a generic description in a way that feels original but also true. So if you look at a forest, you could say, oh, yeah, there's a green forest. And in a sense, that will be true, but it's also a generic description which doesn't invoke anything for a reader. It just is kind of a backdrop then. And if you really closely look at a forest, you'll see hues of brown and green and blue and things mixed together and different textures and different shapes. And if you can kind of find a way to describe things that feel original but also true, I think that is a more immersive and enjoyable experience for a reader. And beyond that, once I figured out what it looks like, I try and figure out what it feels like. So how does it actually feel to be within these places, and what effect do these places have on you, whether directly or indirectly? And as I'm going through, I'm trying to marry up this true sense of what things look like with a real sense of what they feel like. And those are the two things I kind of juggle in my head particularly when I'm going back and editing and thinking, how does this actually work? Does this feel right to me? And that's essentially my process for describing the natural world, even when it's things I've totally made up.
I love how you said original and true, because I think there's a lot to that. Like, it can sound really good, and then you're like, it's kind of bullshit, but it's so pretty, and you kind of have to go in and be like, no, I'm gonna kill my darlings or whatever, and stay true to it. And and it also made me think of like I've heard it described with meditation stuff, like you're taking data, you're just like observing the data instead of putting a story to it. Like what is the actual sense experience? Which again, I really felt when I was reading your book. So yeah, thank you for that. And then in terms of your plot, you said you didn't really structure the plot. Did you kind of sit down and you had your ideas and you had the sense of kind of what you wanted to create, and did you bang out like a first draft, or how was that process for you in terms of the editing and the revisions and stuff?
Oh, I think I have an awful process. I can write one page at a time, and then I'll edit it for days, and then I'll write the next page, and I'll come up with a rough outline for what I want a chunk of the book. I'll never have an outline for the whole book, but I'll have a rough outline for the bit I'm working on, so I know roughly where I'm going towards. And then I just kind of grind it out, and I get so worried about the prose, and I get so worried about whether it's good enough or the characters are strong enough that I obsess over it, and I kind of inch forward that way. So by the time I've finished a whole draft, like, the book's not done and perfect, but I think it's probably closer to being finished than most writers who knock a draft out, because I'll have re-edited every page and every chapter probably 20 times by the time I finish the whole manuscript. And then I'll go back and I'll edit it maybe 2 or 3 more times, and then I'll send it to my editor and publisher. but it's kind of this painstaking process. I know some crime writers who just sit down and over the course of 4 or 5 weeks, they just write a 90,000 page thriller and they don't even look at the page before. And I get like palpitations even thinking about that. I don't know.
Wow. Cool. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear the different ways. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I feel like there's not a wrong way to do it. Obviously, if this is like the result, then it's, but it's yeah. I've heard so many, with an English degree, you take workshops, and it's like, I'm speaking about myself, but like you learn, try this way or try this way, and there's all these different, approaches or different schools of thought about how to write, how to be a good writer, and it's just interesting to hear different authors talk about what they do, because it's every single one of you is different. So it's really interesting to hear.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, so I wouldn't take advice from me, but it's just how I do it.
Yeah. So was it hard to dive into a new novel after your first book was so acclaimed? How was that for you, kind of coming off such a success in Australia?
Oh, thank you. It was a bit, but like at the time I still had a full-time job. So I just didn't have too much. I didn't have any time to be worried about expectations. I had to get it done. I know that sounds like a silly answer, but it's actually true. As writing in the mornings and writing after work at night. So I was a bit worried and a bit unsure of what to do, but I'd already written the kind of first maybe 60 pages before my first book came out, just to see if it went anywhere. So then when I was finishing it and feeling a bit under pressure and feeling a bit like I didn't know what I was doing and I was all a giant fraud and I had imposter syndrome, at least I had a foundation to build on. So that kind of really helped. I had this kind of chunk of the story done that I knew I was really happy with. And then I could rewrite different sections and come up with different ideas and have a foundation. So that's how I did it. And I just didn't really sleep for a year too. So that's how I handled that.
Yeah, great. And what about now? What's coming up next for you? Are you working on a new project? Yeah,
working on a new book. I have to. No, I'm really enjoying it actually. I've got it's probably quite a short novel, I think. It's due out in Australia next year. And it's essentially based on these stories my grandfather used to tell me about a very short period of his life in the 1940s, where he was living on the banks of this river in Tasmania, and his 2 older brothers were away at war and they didn't know if they were alive or not. And he was living on an orchard with his father, who'd survived World War I and had severe PTSD, but I guess at the time they didn't really diagnose those things. And my grandfather assumed he was about to be called to war and he'd probably get killed and he was going to die in a few years. But he really wanted a boat, and he really, really wanted one. And the only way he could make any money was by trapping and killing rabbits in order to sell their skins to the army, and they turned them into these slouch hats the Australian soldiers wear. They're all made of rabbit fur. So he kind of had this maniacal summer where he just killed as many rabbits as was humanly possible in order to be able to buy his own boat, just so he could sail up and down the river a few times before he was called to his death, is the way he saw it happening. So he kind of went crazy, and he was there with his father, who's hugely, hugely not there because he's barely survived the biggest conflict in human history, and now his 2 oldest sons might be dying in the next one. And his youngest son is just running around covered in rabbit blood, ranting about a boat. And all the while, they're kind of also trying to get the apple orchard going. So he tells these stories, and he lived to 92. He only died a few weeks ago. But he lived to 92 and led quite a really interesting and wonderful life. And he had a lot of stories, but there's just this one about that summer just always stuck on my head. I was like, what a crazy and emotionally intense thing to go through. And so I'm turning that into a novel, essentially. I don't want to give away what happens or anything or how much of it is true, but that's what I'm doing. Yeah. I hope it's going to work, but the story's just always stuck with me, and I thought I've just got to do it.
That's awesome. And did your grandfather, I'm so sorry, so he passed away just recently?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago. And he knew I was writing it, and he was very happy I was writing it. He was happy I'd stopped making things up and was telling a proper story for once. Yeah. So yeah, no, he was very. So yeah, I feel very honoured to be able to finish the book now.
Wow. Well, we can't wait to read it. I know we're going to be looking forward to it here, and I don't know what book tour is going to be like post-COVID, but if they send you to the U.S. and maybe you can hit Wyoming and Santa Cruz in one little trip, you know.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Is there any further thoughts you'd like to share about the Rain Heron and yeah, anything else? I'm a few pages away from the end, and I can't wait to go home tonight and just curl up with it. So yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. No, I don't have a lot of thoughts other than I'm just really, really thankful that you guys have put this event on. I really appreciate it. It's so amazing being there from the other side of the world. And yeah, I hope if anyone reads the book that they enjoy it and they find as much hope and magic in the world as I do.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. And just a reminder to our attendees that this event is being recorded. You can find it right back on this page. We do have copies of the Rain Heron. Take this over here. On our website, you can click right on the button right below to purchase it. And yeah, join us for future events. And thank you so much, Robbie, for being here with us tonight. We hope to see you again in the future.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you, Carol.